Today, I want to talk about poverty. And the reason why is because recently there was someone who came out and they were taking a look at what qualifies as poverty. And I think what most people think of is the number that is publicly provided, which is in the $30,000 range. But this time, it was way higher than you would think. And I think there's actually a good case to be made for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at what qualifies as poverty, and then also look at some of the rationale behind that and provide some of my insights as to why I kind of agree with it, although I think the number might be a little bit high.
Let's turn now to poverty. There was an absolutely fascinating essay that went very, very viral amongst the economy literati, and it was about the poverty line. And as you guys may know, the federal poverty line is a set standard. Where it's currently set is very, very low. There's long been a discussion about whether that poverty line really captures things. But this new essay by Michael Green argues that the federal poverty line should be higher. And not just higher, a lot higher. Let's put this up here on the screen. So what he writes very specifically is that the U.S. poverty line, which is currently set to keep a family out of poverty, is $32,150 for a family of four. Michael Green did some math. Quote, for a family of four to afford housing, healthcare, childcare, and other necessities, he calculated that they would need at least $136,000 a year. He says it should be more than 4 times that. A figure would mean that the majority of American households are living in poverty by his metric. This idea, which they specifically say published on Substack, and again, it made a huge, went so viral amongst economists and others. Basically what he's saying, the more like conservative faction is saying it's ridiculous, quote, disconnected from reality, laughable to put poverty line far above the median income in the United States, which is some $83,000. But the thing is that if you read it, it does make sense to me. The only quibble is about the definition of poverty. So the question is...
And just my initial take on that. So I think when you're looking at that graph that was on there, when it was established, how much has it kept up with inflation? My assumption is there's some sort of tie to inflation, right? But that's just the top level. If you're actually to break out, okay, housing, right? How much has that increased versus the time when it was established? If you were to, like, there are certain metrics, school, right? Advanced degrees, college, how much has that increased? There are certain things that have just went on a runaway tear and cost so much more than when these numbers were established, and all they may have pegged them to, 1%, 2%, 3%, whatever inflation is each year. Did it also equate for the huge jumps during COVID? Did it also, these things that were seen as temporary and were supposed to have a reversion back to the mean, but they never did. And so there's just a lot of context that is probably missing from that number. It sounds to me, again, my knee-jerk reaction on it is that 140,000 seems a little bit aggressive. However, if that actually is what it was, I wouldn't be particularly surprised, because prior to COVID, I had said, I kind of, because I was below, at, and above this level, but I said where I kind of found my breaking even point to where I said, anything above this is not as impactful on the quality of your life. And again, this was before housing numbers ran up, before the rampant inflation during COVID, all these things. I said at 75,000 was kind of the break point, where after that, it's just kind of like, it doesn't really matter. It does help out, a little bit. You can put more money away. And so it matters in that aspect of it. But in your day-to-day life and how much breathing room you have, 75,000 was kind of my breaking point. And again, this was kind of like 2017, 2018, like around that time frame. That was when I was kind of saying that was about it. So I think it has shot up from there. Do I think it made it all the way up to 140? Probably not, but it is probably 100,000 or north of there. And so, yes, I think it is way closer to what he's saying, actually, than the, 30 whatever thousand that it's claimed to be, 34,000, 36,000, whatever it is. Anywhere in the neighborhood of the 30,000s. I think you're still in poverty. And I think, again, it depends on what your definition of poverty is. But my experience with it was at that point in time, and again, it's probably higher now, was 75,000. And that would have been poverty. I wouldn't call it 100% poverty because I got into my current house before I was making that much. But it felt, I had stress, right? A little bit. Where it was kind of like, oh my gosh, like I woke up in like cold sweats once or twice where I was like, how am I going to afford it? And then once I was in it, I was like, okay, this isn't that bad. It still was not, I was not able to put away as much money as I wanted. But then, yes, okay, that little bit extra, because I think I was making like 65-ish $1,000 a year when I got into my house. And again, it was like it was like $280,000. So way different, right, from what housing prices are now. But yes, that, having that extra $10,000 of breathing room from when I got into there made a huge difference. All that is, once again, just to reiterate, I think that number that he's providing is much closer to what it actually is versus, especially if you're trying to buy a house for the first time now, especially like all these things are going to be vastly impact that number. So again, even my 75,000 I think is way undershooting it now, relatively, right? It's probably closer to his 140. If you are, once again, if you are trying to buy a house now, if you're trying to buy a new car, if you're trying to, all these things that the prices have just shot up. But that's my take on it. You can let me know what you think about that as well, if I'm right or if you think I'm totally off base.
$1,000. But the thing is that if you read it, it does make sense to me. The only quibble is about the definition of poverty. Mm-hmm. So the question is does poverty mean destitute or does it mean not getting by? I guess we've learned of it as destitute, but not getting by for a long enough period, I don't know. I mean, maybe it does count as poverty.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the, and by the way, that's why part of the whole discussion is really frustrating. And anybody who has lived in a high cost of living area, we all know people making 100, 200, even 200,000 who are not close to making it, like not close to achieving even modestly more than what their parents did. I'm not going to sit here and call it poverty, but I would sit here and say that's a systemic failure. Yeah. And that's part of why I appreciate the essay, because all the you guys should go read it, just specifically about the way that he breaks down all the costs, basic necessities, which we've talked about here before as well. The fact is like upward mobility, especially in the higher cost of living areas, which no, you don't have to live there, but that is where most of the economic activity is mostly unattainable for anybody who makes a median household income. Mm-hmm. That's a systemic issue. And it didn't always used to be like that. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, and so here are his estimates of using what he describes as conservative national average data of the baseline costs, the sort of like participation costs, so that you can be in, normal standing in society and participate in like a normal way with society. Childcare, most expensive, $32,773, $32,000 for childcare. Housing, $23,000 plus. Food, $14,000 plus. Transportation, $14,000 plus. Healthcare, $10K. Other essentials, $21K, required net income, $118, and then you add taxes on top of that, you're getting $136,500. That's where he gets the numbers from. And he says, listen, the quibble that I get from people is, yes, it's good to reevaluate where the poverty line is. I think everybody agrees that the way of calculating is certainly outdated. I can go into more on that in a moment. But they're like, listen, if you're getting a landline, you're putting in things here that are way more expensive than just the essentials. So, but he points out, in order to participate in society, like back when the poverty line was established, you needed a landline, which cost you, minimal amount per month. Mm-hmm. Now the same landline is even cheaper, but that doesn't allow you to fully participate in society, you need that $200 smartphone. And so while certain costs have gone down, the cost of being a full participant in society has gone up dramatically. And then, of course, these categories have gone through the roof.
Yeah, and that argument totally makes sense, right? I mean, trying to peg making it apples to apples, like telecommunications and being able to call and make calls and you're not participating in the same way today. Like, who even really sometimes people make phone calls, but like, how many times do you actually make a phone call anymore? So like having a landline, that doesn't really make sense. Like, I don't even answer probably, I would say 80% of the phone calls that come to my phone because it's just spam, which I think a lot of other people. So like, why would you have a landline anymore if you don't know exactly who? I mean, I guess you have caller ID on it, right? So you know who's calling, but like most of the time it's just spam anyway. So like, you need internet, which internet is more expensive than a landline. You need, like, there's things and that has been true for a long time, right? Where do you go to find jobs? Like, okay, yeah, I guess you can still go out, but like any large company, like if you have a white collar job, or you're looking for one, you're applying online. You're not actually going to Honeywell headquarters or Intel headquarters or any of these companies. You're not going to their headquarters and like inquiring about jobs. You're going online. So you need certain things that are the way that you function in today's world. So if you're not actually quoting those costs, then you're not getting an accurate snapshot of what it actually is. And the way that he broke it down, it does make sense. I think some of those things that he mentioned are a little bit more luxury, which is kind of sad to say, because the things I would put in that category would be things like childcare / having children. Do I think that should be a luxury good? No, I think anyone who wants children should be able to afford them. But yeah, that was the biggest cost that they had mentioned, was over $30,000 for childcare. And the thing I love to point out, and I'll sound like a broken record here, but if you were not aware, because when I had first heard this stat about childcare, I looked it up. Did you know, and this just further proves out my point, private equity owns 8 of the 11 largest companies, like chains, for providing childcare. So think about that. Over 70% of the childcare companies are owned by private equity companies. So, as I constantly say, for everything, for fast food, for housing, renting, for housing, buying up single family homes, for all these different things that I continually, for food, for healthcare, for all these things that I constantly keep saying, private equity is ruining everything. It's literally inflating everything because they're just trying to look for ways to claw out every single cent off the backs of Americans and just rip out the money from them as best they can. Well, guess what? Same thing is happening in childcare. They're literally, because if you can't afford to put your child in childcare and both parents have to go to work, well, guess what? You're discouraging the reproduction rate from going up. You're literally killing the ability for the American family to go out and have children because they go, we just can't afford it. And so that is the biggest thing. That's why I constantly go on and on about private equity, is because even in expenses that you would not have, because the first thing I thought of was, I was like, well, let's just see if they're screwing with this too. And lo and behold, of course they are. Of course they are. And that's the thing, is even the chains that are not owned by private equity, well, they see, you don't think they're doing some sort of competitive analysis and saying, okay, how much are they charging? So then they go, oh yeah, we see that they're charging this much. So then we're going to, same thing, we're going to also raise our rates. It raises the rates for everything. And then also, by the way, the care is getting worse. The amount of children per caretaker is going to get worse, or has gotten worse already. All of these are things that happen because of private equity going into this space. And it's It was just the first thought that goes in is like, all right, let's see if they're ruining this too. And of course they are. So this is just something that we need to kick them out of everything. They're literally making everything worse.
All of these areas, except for food, are places where, costs have gone up and up and up. We talk all the time about childcare, housing. This doesn't even factor in the cost of, a college education, which is another extraordinary expense. And so this helps to capture why so many people who, when you look at their income, you're like, you should be doing fine. Why so many people are like, no, but I'm drowning. But like life is really difficult and I feel like I'm getting behind and I feel like things are going to be more difficult for my children. So it's a very fascinating look. With regards to the poverty line, what he points out is when it was established, food was made up about a third of overall spending. So the poverty line was established as 3 times whatever the average food budget was. And they have kept that metric the whole time, even though now food is only maybe 5 or 6% of the overall budget because these other categories have increased in cost so much. And also, childcare, that used to not be something that needed to be considered at all because you typically had a 1-income family. That income was sufficient for this level of like baseline societal participation. And if you had childcare, it was like relatives usually or neighbors who would take care and look after the kids. So now that you basically have to have 2 incomes in most instances in order to make it in society, that second income, it's not like that's all just going to the bottom line. The first $32,000 of that second income is just going straight to some other person to take care of your kids. That's the first part. So then you have to be clearing more than that to even make the second job worthwhile. And that's the other, that's like the 2-income trap. That's like the hidden costs that have been added on to families. And then the other thing that he points out, which is, part of why I support universal programs versus this like neoliberal piecemeal social safety net thing that we do, is that if you are very low income, life is going to be difficult. I'm not saying you've got it easy, but you do have some government supports, right? You're going to qualify for SNAP. You're going to qualify for Medicaid. You're going to get subsidies with regards to childcare as well. There's going to be some help. And at certain levels, as you climb up the income scale, there are these cliffs where, okay, now I'm not getting SNAP. So now that all is on me. Okay, so whatever income I'm earning, I have to subtract out of that what I was previously getting. Okay, now I go up another level. Now I'm not getting Medicaid anymore. I have to pay full freight for healthcare. That's an extraordinary expense. So whatever additional I'm earning is basically all being eaten up by those additional costs. And you can see how that allows politicians to turn middle class or working poor people against the very poor because they're like, this is not fair. This person's working less than me and getting way more. And they're right. It's not fair. But the problem isn't that, person who is also struggling. The problem is the design of the system. And the problem is those who have rigged the system for their benefit and are keeping everybody immiserated in this way.
Yeah,
Yeah, and that's why I think the system needs an overhaul because, if you qualify just even moderately outside of that and then all benefits go away, that doesn't make any sense. Because then what you have to think about, like, what is the incentive? And if the incentive is like, oh yeah, you work less, then that's what people are going to do because the amount of the benefits that you're getting far exceeds that incremental amount of money that you're going to be bringing home from your job. If you get like a promotion or if you work extra hours or whatever it is. And so, yes, what are the incentives? And that is the challenging thing about it is that no one wants to like that, putting thought into that and constantly reevaluating it, right? Because it's not just if you were to put in a gated system where it's like, okay, well, you qualify for 100% at this, income level and then 80% and 60%. And if you had a graduated system on it, well, then you have to go back in and recalculate all of those different numbers, right, at each of those gates. And they don't want to do that. They're lazy people. They just want to have it's all or nothing. You qualify, you get all of it or nothing at all. And so that is where it is challenging and you would like to see something done with it because once again, you're just incentivizing people to either milk the system. Like there's no, hey, do better for yourself. It's like either I'm down here and I'm collecting or I try and do better for myself. And then until I get to this huge jump, I'm actually doing worse. I'm suffering. I'm working poor. That's literally there's a huge working poor gap in there. And it shouldn't be that way.
The way I always look at it, especially with this one, is not only the two-income trap, but also the prison of a lot of this. For you're damned if you do, and you really are damned if you don't. Also, $30,000. We'd be lucky to have $30,000 childcare where I live. We have I think the 7th highest in the United States, which is only beaten in Northern Virginia by Arlington, which is number 1 in the whole of America here in the DMV.
Jeez.
$150K over a 5-year period. So the point, though, I think it might be 160.
Crazy.
So it is crazy, and that's after tax income.
That should be
right?
a house.
It is a house in some places in this country, but that's the issue. What you see inside of this is not only from housing, but also healthcare. Because he says 10K. I'm lucky if I pay $10,000 for health insurance. That's a long dream after you have a child. If you have employer-sponsored healthcare, I guess you're lucky to pay for it, even though technically it's part of your old benefit package. So the total cost of what could be your wages is much lower. And when you really dig down into his logic, I just think it's like very obvious that really what people are quibbling about is the definition of poverty, and what we should be talking about is making it. And if you don't make it for long enough, and what I've really been convinced, if you don't make it enough in the period of between 20 years old and 35, I'm not going to say you're screwed, because like anyone can beat the odds, but statistically, those are the most formative, best years of your life, where you're laying the foundation that you can build something on top of. And if you miss that period where everything is on a downward trajectory, which is where I think things are right now, then you're going to end up in an area at 35, 40, 42, which is where some of these first-time home buyers are, and you're just way more behind schedule, which delays all kinds of things societally and creates just a deep amount of problems.
And that's a really good point, because, and I'll use myself as an example here, like I came out of college and it was not the greatest market, but I found something after looking for a little bit where it was like very little money. It was for guys that essentially were literally fly by night. They were just trying to turn a quick buck off of something that was actually a kind of cool project, but is basically an automated stock trading system. And this was like back in 2010. So it was not, we're kind of coming back out of the 08, 09 crisis. And yes, okay, again, the system, this was very new. It was very nascent, automated stock trading at that point in time. But the thing is with it is that the guy who was coding it, he was like hopped up on cocaine, and like it was one guy trying to code an entire system. And like, yes, it worked, but it was kind of, niche, and there were kinks, and there were a whole lot of issues with it. But the thing was, they brought me in, and I had to learn, everything about marketing. I basically had to build out the entire program for it. Regardless of everything else I just said, it was a very good learning opportunity where I got to, hey, I have to do a bunch of research. I have to build, okay, what's the strategy? And so you learn, right? So you get your foot in the door in a white collar job, and then you go to the next one. And this is exactly what he's saying, where it's like, okay, now I'm at an actual reputable company, and I, learn more, here's a few more things that I learned about it that's more specialized, whereas, the first one was very broad. So, okay, I learn things here, and then I can go to the next one. And then, I learn, same thing, I learn a little bit more, I go to the next one. I learn a little bit more, I go to the next. And then you finally get to a point where, okay, now I'm like a director level, I'm managing people, and, if you do not have that ladder to climb up, exactly as he's saying, and, pairing that with all the layoffs that are happening and the AI being implemented, so it's, occupying that bottom rung so people aren't allowed to climb that, then yes, absolutely. That, you're not able to participate, build knowledge, and climb during those formative years. And, if you cannot do that, if I don't have those first 3 or 4 jobs, I'm never getting to a director plus level, because you don't have any experience. So why is anyone going to hire you? Like, there's no ladder to climb working at DoorDash. There's no ladder to climb working at Uber Eats. There's that is the biggest problem, is that it's taking away career opportunities and replacing it with like, okay, here's your gig work. And like, that's not, that you don't have any room to grow in gig work. That's just what it is. And by the way, if you're not, in the know about what is happening in those spaces, there's a reason why these companies are valued so highly, is because they're making all the profits on the back of your work. Like, they're not paying you all the money that you should be getting from the work that you're doing. You're doing all the work and they're just providing a platform. And you're incurring, by the way, a lot of those costs as well, like wear and tear to your vehicle, like gas, right? They're not paying you for all that kind of stuff. So even the paycheck that you see, you're not realizing that there's all these other costs associated. So you're not seeing the actual value of the paycheck that you're taking home, which is significantly lower than, what you're actually seeing on your check that you're getting. So just to his point, it is very important, and if you're not getting those opportunities, you're screwing yourself over for the future. And it's not even you're screwing yourself over, you're getting screwed over for your future.
The point of his essay was, I think it was a wake-up call for elites who are in charge, and especially boomers. Again, you guys know I hate on boomer, but like part of the thing that drives me crazy is that typical boomer attitude of like, oh, just figure it out when you're in college or something. They don't look at overall educational inflation. They have no idea what it's like for people to be graduating at $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in debt at a 7% interest rate. And especially if you have a graduate degree, if you're pursuing something like that, that's just debt in the student loan realm. Applies, though, even at the more basic level. Everyone always talks about trade school and accreditations. Accreditation.
And I did a whole debt video recently, which you should look at because I think it does break this down really well. But what I will say to that is, yes, exactly. You're saddling people down with an insane amount of debt as soon as they turn 18. Basically, right? And the promise is that there's going to be these jobs available for you when you get out, but that's not necessarily the case anymore. I have made the case that if I'm running a company or even a department within a company, I'm saying give me AI every day if I'm being objective and I want the best outcomes, because I can put something in, and this is very marketing specific, and I think AI has a huge impact in content creation. But what am I going to do? Am I going to pay a college student for a week to have it pop out an article for me that is 1,000 words and do the research and everything else associated with it? Or am I going to, use an AI for free? You don't even have to buy it if you're using it infrequently. I'm going to use an AI for free. I'm going to have it spit out an article, a blog for me, 1,000 words in a minute or less. Like, which one of those am I going to do? I mean, it's literally a no-brainer. And so, yes, when you are looking at it at this level, of course, that is the direction it's going to go. And so these people are coming out of college with all this debt and no real way to pay it back, because, again, they're not climbing a ladder because all those jobs are that entry level is taken by AI. So they can't climb any further because they can't even get on the first step. And then you're seeing, we went in and we took out all this debt, and now what are we supposed to do with this? You're literally stuck paying this. Even if you file for bankruptcy, you can't discharge it. And so what are you supposed to do? There's literally, and that's the thing that drives me the most nuts about this conversation, is anyone who's not experiencing it now or doesn't pay attention like I think I do, right? I consume content about this for hours a day because I'm trying to learn and understand, and I want to make videos where I am informed and I can give an informed opinion on what I think about this type of stuff. And if you're not doing that, which no one in the government is doing, no one who's retired is doing, they don't care, they're not intellectually curious, well, guess what? They're just going to say, oh, well, you have it better now than ever before, any time in history. It's so much easier. You have all these. It's like, no. The thing you don't understand is everything has gotten so much more predatory. And just using student loans as the first example, again, you're being saddled up with debt immediately. And then everything else is, the prices go up and up and up because they're catering to people who can afford it, like boomers, retirees, people with, who have $100,000, $200,000 a year jobs. And so and this goes back to what I was talking about previously, where it's the top 10% of people incomes are consuming 50% of the consumer economy. So when you're looking at that, of course all the prices are going to be too high because everyone's trying to cater to that 10%. And they're saying, we don't really care about anyone under that because they're not going to be making up our profits. So when you are looking at that, everything is stacked against anyone who is, just coming into the market today. So of course they have it worse than ever before because that income disparity is so huge, and everything is stacked up against those people at the bottom level. Like, they have it undeniably worse than at any other time in history.
Are expensive.
Yeah.
They're not cheap. And so even whenever you take out loans for that, then if you have to meet you have to meet your payment obligation, you're on a newer salary, you're making this. If our cost of housing is some 50, 60% higher, then you have no idea what it's like to live on that very thin margin. And that's just not where things used to be. The one thing I will give them is I do think that we need to readjust a lot of expectations, because this is something I've been thinking about with the whole starter home thing. A lot of starter homes from the 1970s and 1980s would not pass as something that builders would want to do anymore, because they build big, more luxury items because people who are buying homes are mostly richer and have a lot more money. We do need to bring back those Levittown models of like 1,500, 2,000 square foot houses, which are not, look, they're not like nice, it's not like full of marble and a bunch of other shit, but who cares? Like, the place to park the car.
That's not a bad point. I think part of it is, once again, private equity, get them out. We don't need Airbnbs. Like, just go stay in hotels. I'm sorry. Like, get rid of that entire market, because people, going out and purchasing homes and then flipping them as short-term rentals to make it an income. Again, catering to that top percent, those top percentages that can afford to go out and do vacations still. So that is one component of it, but that is another factor that is weighing on the market is, yes, because if you think as a builder, like, are you going to rather build a million plus dollar home, or are you going to want to build a $40,000 home? And it's like, not 40, right? But like $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 home. Of course, they're going to want to build million plus dollar homes because that's where they're going to make the most money off of the plot of land that they are building it on top of. The problem with that is also, and this is a second component that goes along with that, is not only do they want to build more expensive homes, but then on top of that, think about flipping culture, think about like anything where it's going in, like knocking down and rebuilding on top and those kinds of things. When you're doing that, there may have been houses that were not so great that people could go in and, get at the lower price, especially in a hotter market. And then, okay, you can build your way up and kind of go through and then buy a nicer house later and, whatever, grow into a larger house. But now when everyone's flipping is now there are no more like that quantity of, like, we'll call it 300,000 now in today, right? Because it's usually in a hotter market too. Any quantity of like 300,000, which is still pretty expensive, but up to for a first-time buyer, up to like 500,000, right? Those are all being bought and then fixed up and then sold at a much higher price. And that is a problem as well, is that not only are people not interested in building lower income or lower quality housing for people to get into, but then on top of that, the existing stock that is there is also being purchased, renovated, and then flipped to a much higher cost. So further depleting any of the inventory at the low level. And again, it's just all basically making it so that there is no supply available at the first entry level point where it would be affordable for anyone under 40 years old, right? The average age of the first-time home buyer in the United States. There's a reason why it is at 40, and that's because there are multiple things that are all putting pressure on that bottom, the entry-level rung of ownership. So something needs to be done about this. Again, it is very troublesome that it's just an unsustainable model that I think we find ourselves in today.
Modest area in the back, enough space, dining table and a kitchen. That's it. All right. Yeah. You're not going to have a palatial living room. That's okay. I think most people would sign up for that. I really do.
Yeah.
But that option doesn't exist.
If the alternative is just going to be renting forever and like throwing money to a landlord instead of ever building any wealth and getting on that home ownership ladder, like, of course. But there's a giant hole in the market. And because it's not as profitable for developers, so it's not what they pursue, which is why you have to get the government directly involved in some fashion. I think the childcare part of this is so important to highlight. And a couple things that I've been thinking of from a policy perspective. Affordable childcare was part of the Build Back Better bill that ends up getting killed under Biden. So, real missed opportunity there to actually do something that could have had such a tremendous benefit for families across this country. And it's also, I think, an undersung part.
And let's think about why that is. Do you think private equity does any sort of lobbying effort there? Do you think they might have some constituents in Congress that they provide donations to? So, of course, that's not going to get passed. That's not going to, and if it does get passed, it's going to get reverted real quick. Because they are not going to allow that to happen. They absolutely do not want that to happen. They don't care. They want their free gravy train. Again, 8 of 11 of the childcare chains in the United States are owned by private equity. So, of course, that's not going to, they don't care. They just want to see how much money they can make off of each child. So there you are. And that's something where my sister had a child before I did, and she would tell me the cost of it. I'm like, that's literally like having another, and she had a little bit nicer one that she was taking her daughter to. But you look at it and you go, that's literally the cost of living somewhere. Like beyond a rent. You're paying over rent costs for at least what I was paying in rent at the time. You're paying over that cost. Well, I guess I was in my house, but like you're paying over what my mortgage is monthly for childcare for your kid. Like how is this making any sense? Like you could be paying a mortgage on a house, or you could be sending your kid to childcare. Like, okay, things are seriously out of whack if those are the numbers. And so, yes, get private equity out of childcare, get private equity out of everything. Destroy private equity, vaporize it. It should not exist.
Of Zoran's agenda in New York. I think the buses and the rent freeze and the grocery stores got more attention, but much more transformational actually would be the affordable childcare proposal, which he's trying to work with Kathy Hochul on to get implemented. If he's able to do that in New York City, it would be such a huge deal and such a big win for those families. And the other thing that this guy points out is, hey, we talked about COVID and we talked about the stimulus checks and, as an explanation for why people had more money in their bank accounts, that's certainly part of it, and the super dole and all those sorts of things. But one thing that we really didn't account for or talk that much about is the fact that people were at home, so they did not need to pay for childcare.
Yeah, and so there was a mini baby boom at that time.
Yeah, so this gigantic expense, the single largest.
The other thing, too, to call out about this is that not only were the parents at home, but then the children had to stay at home as well, right? Because there are Zoom classes for children. And so in that, because part of it is, okay, yes, if you have a job where you work at home, you still are not really, if you have a lot of meetings and stuff, you're still not really able to look after your child. And part of it was that everyone understood at jobs, it was much more socially acceptable to have your children at home and you have to look after them. Because they were not allowed to go into schools. So you kind of had to, okay, I get it. Mark has his kids and, he has to watch them because they're not allowed to go to school. So we have to make some concessions to make it more accommodating for that situation. That was just the norm. That's what needed to happen. So yes, there are secondary effects like that of, number one, childcare, but then like another thing that you're probably not thinking about is like, did you go out to movie theaters anymore? Like, I feel like movie theaters really, they were kind of on the downward trend anyway, but I feel like they completely collapsed during the COVID times. And if you remember, like, oh yeah, you know, you could get, what was it, HBO Max? They just released all their movies for free on their platform. So you literally just paid your subscription fee and you get to see movies when they would have come out in theaters just immediately, right? There, you can watch it from the comfort of your living room. So I think there were a lot of effects that were kind of secondary of COVID that reduced costs a lot, or a lot more, right? And so yes, that is one component of it, like she's saying, is the childcare, but then also the acceptability and the willingness for people to accommodate, yes, your children are at home. So again, I think there are multiple components along with it. Like if everyone was just working from home now instead, I don't think that would even be sustainable to take care of your children. And again, if you have a lot of meetings, it just doesn't work, right? Because someone has to be watching the children. They can't just be running around, you know, causing chaos, right? And especially depending on how old they are, sometimes, yes, okay, they have a little bit more autonomy and they can play by themselves, but especially when they're younger, or, you know, if they require some sort of supervision because they're more rambunctious or whatever it is, right? It's a case-by-case basis. But there does need to be, you know, if your children do require some amount of supervision and you are both, you know, you have two parents both, even if they're both at home and they both have calls coinciding, happening at the same time, it still would be very challenging to do today. So I think there were additional things where, you know, again, it was more socially acceptable to allow people to be taking care of their children throughout the day.
Budget item for most any family, that was taken off the table and people did not have to pay that. No, it was stressful in many ways having to deal with your kids while you're trying to be on your Zoom call or whatever. But financially, you saw bank accounts got larger for many people during that period for, you know, for most people. Point. And so I think that was an underreported and
it's amazing when you cut out one non-negotiable cost, as I like to call it, non-negotiable things where I need, you know, hey, we have a kid, we have to both work, we have to have some sort of childcare for them. Housing, another non-negotiable cost. Insurance, another essentially non-negotiable cost. I mean, depending on what type of insurance, right? Another non-negotiable cost. When you cut out one of these things that have been inflated and occupied by private equity, and they're trying to nickel and dime you and raise the cost as high as physically possible to, again, claw out every cent that they can out of the average American. Well, as soon as you remove one of those, it shows you how much more breathing room people are afforded. And that's why I say, if you were to get out, and going back to Sagar's original one where he was saying, oh yeah, food was 30% of your paycheck cost, now it's only 5% because all of those other costs have been inflating and inflating and inflating. Get private equity out, let it revert to actual free markets where there's competition having to occur, and watch all the prices fall immediately. And that's the exact thing, is they refuse to do it because there's all these lobbying groups and they're all getting donations from these people. And so of course they're going to advocate for what's in the best interest of these private equity companies that are adding absolutely no value to our economy whatsoever.
Discussed benefit of COVID, I mean, you know, a silver lining sort of, and one of the reasons why there were these sort of contradictory economic indicators, because just not having to pay childcare was such an incredible boon for people, and you're not eating out at work, and you're not having to pay for gas or so much maintenance on your car because you're just at home. So altering that expense landscape was really transformational for a lot of people.
And those were 2020 prices. Now imagine the current prices.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God.
Oh my
Every time you go out to eat, you want to blow yourself in the head. Like, is this even worth it? Is this even? I don't even drink, and my bills
But
are like
then you go to
$50.
the grocery store and you're like, well, it's not all that much.
Right.
difference.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but, seriously, like when you don't drink alcohol and the bills start tipping up near the $100,
yeah.
you're like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
It used to be like $20. But I'm not faulting the restaurants. I get it. You guys
Yeah,
need to make
they're
money.
doing
It's
what
not
they
your
gotta
fault.
do.
The childcare thing, the one thing I do want to say
Yeah.
is, as I've said, I truly believe free childcare, as in other people paying, is not a good idea. I think what it should be is to preserve optionality, as in basically like a voucher or a tax credit system. So if people don't want to work, mom or dad, then they can be paid to do that. Or you can spend that dollar and you can go spend it at childcare, but you need to cap a cost. This is a program that's been implemented in various other countries. It's been very successful. The point, though, is that if you subsidize only childcare, it actually screws over the non-working mother or father, because it means that they don't get the subsidy that they want. It's kind of a
that's fair.
societal
I
design
support
that
that.
pushes people into the workplace if they don't want to be. So the thing is like we have to design this. Child tax credit was a very rudimentary form of this. The point, though, is you have to make it very specifically so people can do the family unit the way they want to do. And there's a lot of data that a lot of women and men would not work if they didn't have to. Most people, a lot of people wouldn't work if they have to. The point, though, is not to say nobody should work. It's to say what's easier whenever you actually want to have a kid. That's why the mini baby boom under COVID is criminally understudied. It happened for a reason, like you just said.
Yeah, and I think that is a really good idea too, because I think there are a lot of people who would love to be stay-at-home moms or dads, but they look at it and they go, well, am I going to just essentially throw away $100,000, $200,000, whatever it is, right? And it's not to say, okay, reimburse them for the whole thing, but if you allow them to have some sort of incentive where they can go, yeah, okay, I can justify it because we're still getting by. And again, I think if one of the parents is making that much, then there is probably not that much of an issue. Like, yes, okay, the same parent might not be able to stay home who's making all that money, but one of the parent, like, you're making enough money that one of the parents can stay home while the other one still works. But if you look at that from someone who's making less money, right? Allowing them the ability to stay home and actually take care of their family and whatever it is, or homeschooling, right? If they for whatever reason don't want their children to go to a public institution, they'd rather do it at home because whatever their argument is, like just allowing people optionality and allowing them to actually have something that would allow them to make the choice that they think is right for their family, I think that's the right way to go. And I think to force someone into a system because that's the only option that they really truly have, I don't think that leads to good outcomes. And I think that's why you see things like this where it's like, well, I mean, if I look at it, it's like, how can I even enjoy my children or bring them up the way I want them to be? Because if you believe in, hey, it's nurture versus nature, and I'm on the nurture side, you're not even raising your child, really, right? What is the joy of having someone who, I don't want to say reflects, right? Because they're their own human being, but you have a lot of input on how your child comes up. But it's significantly removed when it is a caregiver or an institution or whatever that is shaping the way your child comes up. And there's a lot made of it about, especially during the woke, right? Over the last 4, 8, whatever years, where indoctrination in colleges, that is kind of the exact example where you send them away, they're spending, if they're at a campus, they're surrounded by it, they're spending however many hours a day in classes being taught this, and then they come home for the holidays and it's like it's a completely different person. Same thing, they're going away to school for 8 hours, or they're, whatever it is, they're not getting your same values and morals and that kind of stuff. And if that is important to you, you should completely have the optionality to be able to raise your child and provide for them the sort of education, the sort of morals, the sort of, all these things to help them become the person that you hope they can become. Because the other part of it too is that when you are sending them away to these places, how do you know that the person that's taking care of them cares about them? I mean, they're not going to. Just point blank, that's unarguable. They're not going to care about your children the way that you would. And so, yeah, I mean, it is a depressing thing to think about, but I think it's undeniable. You can't argue that. So that, again, just my opinion, but there's a lot that can be discussed around that, and there's a lot of things to consider, but I think allowing people to make their own choices, if they're okay sending them to a daycare for 8 hours a day, 9 hours a day, then, that's totally fine. But for people who want to have that kind of imprint upon their children and impact in their lives, I think they should 100% be able to do that.
There's a lot less stress. People had more money in their bank accounts. It's pretty obvious. Now, I'm not sitting here saying that the Hungarian model or throwing money at all of this is going to boost the fertility rate over 2.5%. Like, that's not going to happen. There's too much evidence that throwing money and making it acceptable just simply is not really enough to compete with modernity. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to get marginally better than where we are.
That you shouldn't make life easier
right, exactly.
for families.
Right. It's not a good reason.
Even if it's not, so they breed more, but just so that their quality of life is better.
All right. And that's about all I wanted to cover today. I just thought it was a very interesting take on what actually qualifies as poverty. I think a huge component of it does kind of rely on what your living standard is, where you live. Essentially, there's a bunch of different factors that can go into it. But I do think the number that is publicly given of, again, in the $30,000 range is way too low. I feel like it hasn't been updated for the last few years, all the inflation that we've seen, as well as the cost on essentially all non-negotiable goods going through the roof. But if you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, hit the subscribe button down below. It really does help my channel grow. And if you have made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.